federal law enforcement agents. They are just absolutely fish out of water. The traffic stop was very, very badly handled.
Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to the Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Support the forum. Go to buymeacoffee.com/fountainheadforum. Thank you. Welcome to the Party Pal. This is Fountainhead Forum 414. Mike Termott is back. This is after he ran for vice president with the Libertarian Party. Mike is went back to the red team now, and he's going to make a case of why he thinks liberty-minded people should work for the red team. I'm very skeptical, but I'm going to give him a platform to talk about anyway. So how are you, Mike?
It's good to be with you, Chris. Thank you. I hope that you're going to be okay with this snowstorm we have coming.
It's going to get cold down here. I don't think we're going to get the snow, though. I'm in Texas, so a lot of that stuff It's funny, but I think Dallas gets a lot more of that than Austin. But yeah.
So I think you're going to be south of the problematic areas. I'm in Eastern Virginia, and we are planning on getting some snow and some ice.
Yes, I'm curious to know how it'll affect the football games. But anyway, Mike, so you did your vice presidential run with Chase, and then after that, you pretty much walked out of the Libertarian Party. What is your case for working with Liberty Republicans? Because and there are some good Liberty Republicans, but I've heard this a lot of times. I mean, what's your case?
The Republican Party matters.
So is that all you're going to say? Is the Republican Party matters?
Is there anything else that needs to be said? Is there anything more that one would have to say to make one's case?
Well, you said you had an hour, Mike. I mean, if that's
I had a what?
You said you had an hour, so that I thought you would have filled up the space with
I do have an hour, and we can talk about anything you want. I'm happy to talk about the Republican Party. But the big reason that people should join either the Republican Party or the Democratic Party is because those are the parties that matter in this country. The debate in American politics that is going to matter over the next 2 years, over the next 6 years, is going to happen inside of the Republican Party. There is not going to be a debate that matters, in my estimation, inside of the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party is not even up to the starting line in terms of figuring out what has gone wrong for them over the past couple of presidential election cycles. I believe that they will eventually figure out that they've been going in some pretty silly directions, and they will eventually have a robust debate inside of their party, and perhaps they will make a contribution to the overall political debate in this country. But I don't believe that that's, around the corner in terms of a small number of years. Nor do I think that there are parties other than the main two, the Libertarian Party or anybody else, that are going to be playing a significant role in terms of any sort of intellectual debate, what direction policy should go in the United States. The Libertarian Party I have loved it for a long time. I was active inside the Libertarian Party for more than a decade, a member for something like 14 years. So I have every affinity and morsel of affection you can possibly have for the Libertarian Party. But there is no real reason to believe analytically, there's no structural reason to believe that the Libertarian Party is going to play any different role in the future than it has in the past. No real reason to believe the next 50 years is going to be any different than the past 50 years. And the past 50 years has been terrific, right? It would be inaccurate to say that the Libertarian Party has not played a role in the last 50 years. But it would also be inaccurate to say it's played a major role, a significant role. Has it moved the needle a few times in particular issues? Probably. I think one could make the case the answer to that is no. Someone could make the case that the answer is yes. But is it going to play a role even of the same order of magnitude as the Republican Party, the Democratic Party? No, absolutely not. And the problems with the Libertarian Party are structural. It has to do with the fact that this is a two-party system. No one should suggest that's a good thing, but no one should suggest that it isn't true either. We have a two-party system in the United States. The two parties make sure that is propagated into the future. And so the Libertarian Party attracts people who are comfortable being in a third party outside of the system. And for a lot of reasons, the Libertarian Party is set up to do things differently and to do different things than the Republican Party and the Democratic Party are. So will the Democratic Party eventually have a libertarian wing? Yes, I believe that it eventually will. The Republican Party does now and is developing that. And the big debate that's going to matter is going to be how the Republican Party defines the legacy of Donald Trump, what that party does once Trump leaves. And it can go in either a couple of different directions. One is it can have, it can lean into more nationalism and protectionism, more centralized authority and more authoritarianism. And I think a lot of people would argue that's where the smart money would be, right? If you had to bet, I think you could make the case that it is likely that the Republican Party will go in that direction. On the other hand, I think there's a significant chance that the party goes in the direction I would like to see it go, which is to say more adherence to the Constitution, not less, more respect for free markets, more fiscal conservatism, more protection of our medical freedoms, a less militaristically interventionist foreign policy. Some might argue that's where President Trump's center of gravity is. It would be hard to make that argument in the last few weeks, but optimistically, maybe that's where the White House wants to go in the long run. I don't know. But these are with the exception of the desire to move toward a less interventionist foreign policy, the rest of these principles are what the Republican Party has been about for a long time and got away from constitutionalism and fiscal conservatism and free markets. And that's too bad. But I think that there is a case to be made that you could expect some success in moving the party a little bit more back in that direction where we want it to go. Call it libertarianism or call it the basic principles that we used to believe drove the Republican Party. That's the direction we want to go.
Okay, so you brought up some issues like medical freedom. Back some years ago there was Medicare Part D that was passed by a red house and George Bush signed it into law. So how do you plan on getting this party to care about medical freedom after they've done something like that? And it also doesn't look like they're going to get rid of Obamacare either.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't look like they're going to get rid of Obamacare anytime soon, but there are a number of Republicans who would like to see that happen. The Republican Party can represent a free market center of gravity. It has done so in the past, and I believe that it can again in the future. Obviously, insurance markets are extremely complicated and politically fraught with hazard. It will be difficult to move to limit the expansion of the subsidies under Obamacare, to move to limit the extension as well as the expansion of the subsidies that already exist. That is going to be a fight. I think it'll be a fight worth having. And whether we come out on top of that or not, I cannot predict. But I do know that it is the Republican Party who will be on, if there's any chance of having a party on the right side of that argument, it'll be the Republican Party that'll be engaged in that in a meaningful way.
Okay, so with regarding to the Constitution or the Bill of Rights, the red team did pass the Patriot Act, and they've renewed the Patriot Act. So again, how are you going to change?
As did the blue team.
Yes, that did the blue team. Yes. How are you going to change minds on that?
I think a lot of minds already have changed about the Patriot Act. A lot of folks inside the Republican Party have been disappointed by the way that it was implemented, even if it was the case that they were supportive when it was enacted. It was a strange political environment when it was enacted, right? So I think a lot of folks felt like they were doing the patriotic thing. It was a great marketing ploy to give it the moniker that it had. But I think a lot of folks look at that, realize that in implementation, if you care at all about the Constitution, you've got to feel tricked, right? And that's the difference between learning the hard way and understanding your libertarian principles enough a priori to understand that that was not a good bill to sign.
Who do you think will get the nomination in 2028?
Do you mean for president?
Yes, for president.
I don't know. I don't think that there is an odds-on front. Well, I know that there's not an odds-on front runner today. I'm hoping Rand Paul will run.
Yeah, and of course he did run before, but yes.
Yeah, he ran before. I thought he got out too early last time that he ran. Will he hang in there this time? Will he get traction this time? I don't know. Obviously, I shouldn't say obviously. We all expect that J.D. Vance will run.
Yes.
I don't expect that he will put a whole lot of daylight between himself and the rest of the Trump administration. So that may turn out to be, at least in part, a referendum on the Trump administration. If that's the case, he could secure the nomination and then not do very well in a general, right? A lot of action is yet to be played out between now and what, 2.5 years from now in a general election. How the economy behaves, as well as just how weird foreign policy gets coming out of the White House. These are major factors that are going to drive how the American electorate feels about the Trump administration. And I think a lot of that will drive how the Republican Party feels about J.D. Vance and what kind of success he has. Who do you think will secure the nomination?
As weird as things have been, I honestly don't know. I suppose Vance will go for it, but it's hard to say.
It is hard to say. I don't think that there's a front runner. I was curious to find recent polling had J.D. Vance at such a relatively small number, something like less than 30% of Republicans said that they were, predisposed to making him their first choice. I think the majority of Republicans probably had no box to check at all. They haven't really spent much time thinking about it, but I would have thought that number were higher. I think it just goes to show that it's very, very early in the process. Once candidates start to declare, I suppose people will start thinking about it.
Yeah, it's gotten much more unpredictable lately. It's do you think there's a possibility that Trump will try to angle to extend this term or go for or suspend elections or anything like that? I mean, maybe some of the crazier people are saying that. I don't know if that's true or not, but who knows?
Well, it depends on what the question actually is. Do I think there's a chance? Unfortunately, yeah, I don't think you could argue that the chance is zero. you know, would we have thought before 2020 that all of the silliness surrounding that election and the transfer of power would have taken place? We would have said that's the chances of all that happening were close to zero, right?
Yes.
A lot of that was surprising.
Well,
So it, there's almost nothing you could come up with today that someone would say, "Oh, that just is now that's too far. That's impossible," right? There's almost nothing in that category. I don't think it's likely. I know Steve Bannon has talked about finding a way. Um, and President Trump has joked about it. I think it's a terrible thing to joke about, particularly given not only his background regarding 2020's election, but also regarding his background being a jokester. Sometimes he teases things and then they actually become something that he's after. And so it does appear from time to time when he floats something in a informal, almost silly way, it's his trial balloon, right? And for this reason, he
yes.
ought not to be musing and joking about a third term. I think there are a lot of reasons to believe that he he would not try such a silly thing. He's no spring chicken. Um, and there have been enough warning signs. There are enough people worried about this that the pushback would be fast and furious. So maybe that's the mitigating good news if anyone were worried about it.
Yes. What do you think about Mitch McConnell?
You mean remaining in office so long? Is that what you mean?
Remaining in office, what he does? Would you like to get him out of office? I mean, would you?
Well, he's got to leave office because he's not, very fiscally conservative, and he's got to leave office because I don't know that he pushes for the set of principles I wish he would. He's got to leave office because he's several thousand years old. I think he's a well-meaning, hardworking, patriotically feeling guy. I'm sure. I don't know him. So I don't mean to make it seem personal, but in politics, it is typically the case that to move a party or even caucuses and large groups of people in a different direction, it has to be done with different people. This is why it's so important that you change politicians sometimes. You can't just change how a particular politician behaves. That's very difficult to do. It doesn't happen very often. It's not effective. It doesn't come off as authentic. So I wouldn't argue, well, we have to change the way Mitch McConnell does business. I think we have to change leadership.
What do you think about the fact that so many coronavirus shutdown governors on both sides got reelected in 2020 or 2022? Whether it be Gavin Newsom in California or Greg Abbott in Texas, who is actually running again this year.
Yeah, it's a weird thing, isn't it? I really do believe that there are huge proportions of the American population that liked the shutdown. Not liked the shutdown as in liked the depression, the economic depression that was nationwide, or liked people losing their jobs, uh, liked having to stay at home, liked the psychological implications of so much economic shutdown. I don't mean it like that. What I mean is I think there are a lot of people in the United States who thought it was good policy, who thought that staying away from each other would stop the spread of the virus and would therefore either mitigate the number of deaths or sickness or the extent to which hospitals got swamped, or at the very least bought time for the development of a safe vaccine. these are not irrational things to think. They just turned out to be things that weren't true, right? So I'm not suggesting that people who felt differently than, probably you and I did are bad people. They were to a certain extent just tricked or wrong. And so I think it really speaks volumes of how influential some of these governors were, the extent to which they succeeded in making their case. We're talking about leaders, political leaders, and politicians aren't leaders, but people who sat on top of their political apparatus. These folks really did an amazing job. We're amazingly successful at imposing something that was just abjectly bad for us, and made the case that it was good for us. That is not easy to do, politically speaking, in terms of communication, right? In terms of winning people over to your side in a policy debate, that is not easy to do. And considering that today the data are available to make the case, objectively speaking, that the shutdown did not, at least not significantly, mitigate the spread of the virus or prevent death or any of the stated objectives. All it really did was delay things. It may have slowed things down an inch here or there, but what it really did was undermine our way of life, and very significantly, and for a long time, not
Yes.
just the months and months of the shutdown, but the years of recovery.
And considering that there was one governor who stood alone in all this, so what's your opinion of Kristi Noem, who is now the Department of Homeland Security and seems to have forgotten a lot of those things she knew when she was governor of South Dakota?
Well, look, Governor DeSantis might argue that she was alone in that fight, but I take your point. Kristi Noem is a politician. She's obviously not a leader, and I think that she's demonstrating that today in terms of her inability or unwillingness to take a cold, hard look at the way, for example, not just the entirety of DHS, but in particular, ICE is conducting business. I, I, I think that a lot of folks, myself included, believe that because we are a nation of laws, immigration laws need to be enforced. However, having been a law enforcement officer myself for 11 years, I can tell you that there's a right way to go about certain things and a wrong way to go about certain things in terms of enforcement. And and that has a whole lot of aspects to it, from prioritization to implementation, coordination with local authorities, adherence to the Constitution being paramount. And Kristi Noem definitely gives you the impression that she is a fish out of water and uncomfortable wrestling with these issues. She gives you the impression that in some cases she just hasn't thought through these issues, right? If you didn't know better, if you had no idea who this person was, and just watch the way that she handles herself in front of a camera regarding the way ICE is doing business. If you didn't know anything about her and you watched her press conferences, 2, 3 of them, and then someone comes to you and says, she's a former governor, you would say, no way. You'd say, get out of here. There is no way that unsophisticated, uncurious person becomes the governor of a state in America.
Mike, this is something I really should ask you. Since you did work as a police officer, what do you think about the shooting of Renee Good?
Well, obviously it's complicated.
I mean, yeah, I mean, and the one thing I think about, for example, ICE has a certain amount of authority, but ICE doesn't. They don't give people speeding tickets. They don't give you a ticket for littering. They're not traffic cops. So how does this necessarily fall even under their part of their authority? That's what I'm wondering about.
How what does?
Well, for example, to go up to somebody who's just blocking traffic or something like that, and I don't even get the impression that she was necessarily blocking traffic. It seems like
No, she was absolutely blocking traffic. There's no question about that. They have I mean, they're carrying out federal law enforcement activity. They have all the authority they need to get people out of the street so they can drive their cars. I don't think anyone would argue otherwise about that. The issues revolve around the fact that they're not very good at their job. And part of that is because they've been assigned a job for which they are unprepared. They're not trained. They're the wrong agency in some sense to be doing business in a metropolitan area, in an urban setting. As someone who worked as a local cop in a very dense urban area, uh, relatively high crime, dense metropolitan area in South Florida, I can tell you that there is a big difference between, well, there's a big difference between a local urban police officer and a state cop, right? State police are like fish out of water when it comes to interacting with the public, whether it's in dangerous situations or just everyday no big deal situations. It's not the same training, it's not the same experience, not the same attitude, and in many cases not the same incentive structure. Local cops are part of the community. If you're going to work in a community for more than a decade as I did, or even for 10 months and stay in the same community, you necessarily adopt a different attitude toward the community with whom and in which you are working. And there's a big difference between, again, state police and federal law enforcement agents. They are just absolutely fish out of water. The traffic stop was very, very badly handled. And just one piece of that was that this officer wound up in the front of a car, in front of a car with its engine running. Now, I don't want to say that it's impossible for a local cop to have done something that stupid, but let me say it's really unlikely a cop who is, or even a person who, you don't have to be a law enforcement officer to be smart enough to know you shouldn't stand in front of a car with its engine running. But I think it's really unlikely that a cop who was used to working in an urban environment, who was used to conducting traffic stops, who was used to working with people in stressful situations with motor vehicles, I think it's really unlikely that such an officer winds up standing in front of a car with its engine running. He put himself there. That was a dumb thing to do. And then to compound the problem, there was chaos among the three officers. One is saying one thing, one is reaching for the door. Those are two different dumb things. And then the officer in question has his phone out, which is completely stupid. Should have been wearing a body cam, but wasn't. Obviously, that's not agency policy. I hope that changes soon for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is it might reduce the extent to which officers are doing something stupid, like using their own phones as cameras. You would never see a local cop doing something that dumb. And for a lot of reasons, Not the least of which is if something does happen, you're going to lose your phone to the evidence technician. So nobody wants that to happen. And sure enough, he winds up in a situation where he has his phone in one hand and the gun in the other. Just absolutely chaos and chaotic. Having said all that, uh, the next question becomes, oh, and by the way, everyone else bungled the situation too, right? Obviously, she should not have driven the car toward someone. I don't think she saw that person standing there initially. And when she got going, she was turning the wheel and she probably knew she wasn't going to hit him. I still don't know with any certainty. I guess DHS is saying he did get hit. Hopefully not much. We really don't have a readout on the extent to which that's true. So at least she thought she wasn't going to hit him. And I assume, I don't know that for sure, but whether she thought she was going to hit him or not, she obviously handled the situation very, very badly. Has nothing to do with whether or not he's a law enforcement officer. Don't drive your car toward people. Okay. As a rule, don't drive your car toward people. When you become a law enforcement officer, you do not give up your right to defend yourself.
Yeah.
And being bad at your job does not mean you have to put up with people running you over. And those are principles that a lot of folks looking at this situation want to pretend don't exist, right? A lot of people want to say, well, he screwed up the situation so badly, this is all his fault. Well, maybe part of it is his fault, right? He did screw up. He got himself in a bad situation. That does not mean you have to put up with someone driving a car at you. The other thing that people need to remember is that his vantage point was such that he couldn't see which direction the tires were pointed. Did he see her turn the wheel? I don't know. Could he have gotten out of the way? Maybe. I don't know with certainty. He was obviously trying. For the most part, he did get out of the way. Whether he got hit or not, I don't know. Like I say, DHS says that he did. So I guess for the moment, we'll have to take their word for it.
Yeah. Well, I was referring to the fact, that, the IRS doesn't arrest people for immigration violations, and ICE doesn't arrest people for tax evasion. There's certain scopes of authority that these agencies have.
That's right, but they were out there for immigration purposes.
Yeah, and often, in situations like this, you will see, for example, the federal agents might call up a local police officer. Hey, can you help us out with this? And you've probably been in situations like that, right, where you've been working with the feds.
Well, yeah, the big problem here is that they didn't have the resources out there to control the crowd. And, well, all kinds of problems. I'm not taking back what I said about the horrific techniques they employed in trying to get her to move her car or move her person.
Yes.
But they should have had the resources out there to control the crowd, and they didn't. Now, part of that is because they didn't have enough officers out there. They should have realized that Minneapolis is not going to help them out. Minnesota is not going to help them out. They're going to have to handle this on their own. And they should have sent another 200 officers. But they didn't. But they didn't. And that's a problem. Now, it also needs to be said that Minneapolis PD should have been out there.
Yeah.
The state police, if Minneapolis is not going to help, the state police should have been out there. Local police should have been out there to control the crowd. I think it's an abdication of responsibility to say, well, our local ordinance says we're not supposed to help officers, federal officers, with immigration enforcement. And therefore, we're not going to help with crowd control. Those two things don't go together. You don't get to abdicate responsibility for taking care of your community, keeping your community safe, just because you have an ordinance that says you're not going to help with immigration enforcement. Those are two very, very different things. And so of all the mistakes that were made that day, and I think everyone behaved badly, right? I haven't seen a single actor out there that did what he or she should have done. But in addition to that, you have to find it absolutely unacceptable that local authorities were not out there to help with crowd control. They could have helped avoid this situation.
Certainly, yeah. Well, we're
And
coming
that's
out.
not to say that you shouldn't be complaining about ICE, right? If the mayor wants to complain and the governor wants to, there's a lot to complain about. ICE is behaving very, very badly. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that the way they've gone about their business has violated people's Fourth Amendment rights. This is to be taken extremely seriously. But that's a political matter. How these things are enforced is a matter of policy. People should be protesting. I wouldn't protest the law enforcement officers. They're not the ones making these decisions. They should be protesting the people making these decisions, the politicians and the mayor and the governor. If they want to engage that debate, as I believe they should, then they should do that. But while you're doing that, you're not helping your cause by having Minneapolis PD and Minnesota State PD stand down, thereby making the community less safe. You're not helping the matter.
Yeah, and this brings us back to a very important question. Does it seem like the average red voter cares anything at all about the Fourth Amendment?
That's an interesting question. You use the word average. I don't know.
Well, the typical voter, because I don't know. My impression of the general red voter is not very good. And in some cases, I think there's a case of, well, and it's also another case too, Mike, that what's unfortunate is that hate is more popular than liberty.
Hate is very popular. I get it. No argument here. Hate is extremely popular. I think it's a bipartisan popularity. I think the left has all kinds of things that it hates as well, including the right. I think red hates blue, blue hates red, and that's a huge problem for us. One might argue that's the fundamental and largest problem here. The fact that so many Democrats don't want immigration law enforced at all is a big problem. Now, we can make an argument that we want that law to be changed, right? As a matter of fact, I would make the argument that I would like to see a lot of the law changed. I would like to see a pathway to citizenship for people who have been here illegally, undocumented, who have been here a certain period of time, not committed crimes, who have become important members of the community. I think that as a matter of prioritizing resources, in terms of recognizing that the reasons people are here is because the federal government of the United States allowed it to be so, right? I think that a pathway to citizenship would be appropriate. I would like to see our laws change, but they haven't changed, right? And so we have this very bad situation where the laws were not enforced for a long time, and now they are being enforced. And law enforcement is ugly. Law enforcement means when people have broken the law, a government that we have elected and appointed to do the dirty work for us has to compromise and in some cases take away people's liberty as a matter of either enforcement or as a matter of bringing justice and punishment and all of that. It's a very dirty, unhappy ugly business. And that's one of the reasons why I'd like to see some prioritization and a pathway to citizenship for a lot of folks who are here illegally. One of the things, Chris, I don't think we should forget is that if you and I were in Mexico, if we were Mexican citizens, if we had grown up in Mexico, right? And President Biden leaves that border open, you and I are running that border. We just are. There is no argument that should suggest that that's not a good idea. There are reasons why it's not a perfect idea, but I think you've got to recognize that for a lot of folks, the risks inherent in running the border illegally are worth it. It's just a rational incentive structure that leads people to come into the United States from Mexico. Given that, I think the federal government has a responsibility to the extent to which the American people want border control. That's a whole nother argument. What kind of control do we want? Because I would like to see much more legal immigration. But set that aside just for a moment. If we agree that we don't want a completely open border, and not everyone does agree, but for the moment, let's accept the fact that the vast majority of the American public does not want a completely open border. That obliges the federal government to have some control. That obliges the federal government to stop people from coming in and to have some vetting. Even all of the Libertarian presidential candidates, for example, said that the government should have some control over the border and there should be some vetting. There was no one who argued otherwise. Okay. If you don't do that and people come into the United States, whose fault is that? Whose fault is that? Who should feel tricked, right? You know it's going to happen. You know the logical result. And then you turn around 5 years later, 10 years later, 15 years later and say, now we're upset about it. Now we've let 10 million people in the United States and now we're going to throw them out. Well, that's closing the barn door after the horse has left. And now to round up these folks and deport them is expensive. It's ugly. And to do it in the way that ICE has been doing it not only makes it more expensive and more ugly, but ICE has been violating. Plenty of examples have surfaced. I don't mean it's in every instance, but plenty of circumstances have surfaced. Plenty of evidence suggests that ICE has not done a very good job of protecting the Fourth Amendment rights of people who are in the United States. And remember, your Fourth Amendment rights are your Fourth Amendment rights, irrespective of whether you're an American citizen. The Constitution is set up to limit the authority of the federal government, not to give us our rights. Our rights come from God.
Mike, there's another question I've got asked there too, and I don't hear very many people, politicians or pundits, well, maybe one or two, but if you're offering people lots of free stuff and they come here, whose fault is that?
Good point. Not only do you have
I've heard Rand Paul introduce a bill, and this is also something that costs a lot of money. It seems like the easiest thing, if you don't want immigrants, it seems like to me the easiest thing to do would be to cut off all the free stuff and then see what happens. Maybe they'll leave. And also there's another factor in this too. The law that requires hospitals to treat anybody. A lot of illegal immigrants go to emergency room for their free health care.
Of course they do. It's rational, and in many places they have access to public school systems. Yeah. There are federal laws against being an illegal, undocumented alien and availing yourself of Social Security and other entitlement benefits. So we do have some of that in place now. But to your point, there are aspects of the services that are provided by the federal government and state governments and local governments.
Yes.
That come at a great discount, and in many cases they're free. If you were to do an even better job than we already do at excluding folks from those services, I think that you could save a penny, and in some cases $1. But I don't think that that is going to significantly stem the flow. I don't think it's true that people run the border for free stuff. The difference in lifestyle between someone growing up in Mexico and someone struggling to make ends meet without speaking very much English in the United States is a huge difference. It is a huge difference. Plenty of incentive to run that border without worrying about free safety net benefits from the federal government or other levels of government. And that's not to say that we shouldn't do a better job of excluding people from those benefits. We should. By the way, our entitlement reform programs need reform, period. Not just as a matter of excluding people who shouldn't be eligible by virtue of being here illegally. That's a different argument. And it's a philosophical matter. If you're not a fan of these entitlement programs, on some level, you don't really care all that much whether the beneficiaries are citizens or legal non-citizens or illegal aliens. You just want these entitlement programs pared back. I think a lot of folks who argue against allowing folks that are undocumented or who are not citizens but are here legally, excluding them from these programs, I think a lot of the folks that argue that that's a good idea, it's because they don't like the entitlement programs, period, which is legit. I'm not trying to suggest that's not a legitimate feeling and position to have, but I don't think it's fundamentally about immigration.
True, and we've probably been on that too long. What would you think about Ron DeSantis running in 2028?
You mean, would I like it because I think the governor's a good guy?
Do you think he's pretty? I mean, I don't know. He's right on some things. He's more right than a lot of others.
Well, that's for sure. It's a matter of comparison. He would be a better candidate than a heck of a lot of other Republicans, better candidate than Democrats. I'm trying to think of a counterexample. I can't. Would he have a really great shot? Is there a lane for him?
I'm not asking for a prediction. I'm asking what you think about him ideologically. I mean,
well, I think his center of gravity is more liberty oriented than a lot of other Republicans. So that's a good thing. He's no Rand Paul, don't get me wrong. But does he have more respect for the Constitution than, say, J.D. Vance? Absolutely. Absolutely. I don't know that he's a great candidate. I think he struggled last time around, notwithstanding him having spent what I understand was literally north of $100 million. That's a lot of money. Could he pull that off this time in terms of raising a lot of money and being a stronger candidate? I wouldn't be optimistic on his behalf, but I'd like to see it. Sure.
Yeah. Mike, I think the last time, it's been so long since you've been on here, I don't think I even got a chance to ask you about this man. Have you been paying any attention to this man in Argentina? I've done over 100 shows about him. but I think I did I think the last time I did a show with you is before I ever did a show about him. So I think there's some definitely lessons to be learned from this guy, right?
Well, yeah, there are political lessons, there are implementation lessons, and some fairly basic financial lessons to be learned. Remember, too, that Argentina is a very different place than the United States. 100 years ago, it was not so different. What a lot of folks don't remember is that 100 years ago, Argentina had the fifth highest per capita income in the world of any of the nearly 200 nations. That's something. That nation, in terms of economic development, stagnated, crashed. The economy in Argentina has not only been bad, but it's been awful. Now it's in the bottom half, probably nowhere near the midpoint in terms of per capita income. And it's because of so much socialism. You have to have a disaster. One of the lessons, Chris, I believe, is that you have to have a disaster of that magnitude, of that protracted nature, decade after decade, in order to bring someone to power as radical as Milei. Now, maybe he was that radical because the situation in Argentina is so bad that radicalism played better than it would, say, in the United States. Maybe, if you take the same guy, if you take Milei, you put in the United States, maybe he's philosophically the same, but he doesn't present himself as being so radical. So there are some political lessons there that radicalism can succeed, at least when the situation is that bad. And then I think you can argue that as far as implementation goes, you can be fairly radical in the implementation. And politically, people will accept a great deal, but they do lament, they do miss having a little bit of stability. Stability may not be the right word. Things were obviously very, very bad in Argentina economically, but any change is going to remove what little stability you had. It's been quite an upheaval. And that is what led to the financial pinch that the government was feeling, and the reason Milei reached out to the Trump administration for what we all hope is relatively temporary financing.
They've already given the money back. But anyway, Mike, I should ask this sooner. What do you think about the resignation of Marjorie Taylor Greene?
It's something, isn't it?
Yeah.
I thought it was really interesting. I think it was important. I don't know that Marjorie Taylor Greene is an important person. I don't know that she's not. She may become an important person. But the fact that she was such a vocal Trump supporter and that he was supportive of her, right? And that relationship went so bad, not just, not returning each other's phone calls, but him calling her a traitor. The fact that went so bad, so fast, this wasn't over a decade. This was, over like a weekend. It went so badly is really something. There got to be important lessons there. And the other thing that needs to be said is over what, right? She was advocating for the release of more information about Epstein and Epstein files, famously, and positioning herself as having done so on behalf of the victims. That's a fairly strong political position. Now, you can argue that she said certain things that maybe you wouldn't have said. She was asking too much too fast. I wouldn't make that argument, but, I suppose the Trump administration could suggests that she didn't handle the situation perfectly. Whatever. Politically speaking, she was in an extraordinarily fortified position, asking for things that most Republicans have been asking for a long time, for years. Things that Trump and his administration had effectively promised, and wrapping herself in the interests of victims whom I think all Americans agree were victims. You know, there's not a counter argument that these girls and young women were victimized. Not much counter argument there at all. So why would you, politically speaking, why would you go after her? And the implication is that there is a reason why Trump and the administration do not want the Epstein files released. I'm not going to pretend to know what that reason is. We can all use our imagination, and we all do use our imagination, don't we? We can all guess, but we don't know. And so there you have it. It's just a weird situation where the president has demonstrated that for bad political motivations, he will make bad political decisions because he is surrounded by people who do not help him make good decisions. The president gets the worst staff work of any administration I have ever seen, and by far. There is no example of a presidential administration in the past populated with such nincompoops as this one. Just people who agree with him no matter what silliness he comes up with. And I think you've got to recognize that he does come up with bad ideas, but presidents in the past have come up with bad ideas. But they have up until now been surrounded by people who help them, not every time, not every time, but help them at least frequently avoid the number of missteps that he has made.
Yeah. So, that brings us to probably the last question I'm going to ask is, they're spending $20 million to defeat Thomas Massie in the primary. What makes you think you can sell a liberty message in a party that's doing something like that?
Well, it's not the whole party doing that. Thomas Massie is in the party too, right?
Yeah.
All right. So
I think he'll probably win.
Let me turn the question around to ask exactly the same question. What makes you think that there's no hope for a party that will re-elect Thomas Massie, as it has done time and time again, despite $20 million being spent against him in a primary? A party that returns Thomas Massie to power in a local congressional district, notwithstanding a $20 million uphill climb. And he won't spend that much. But a party that returns that guy to power is a party that I think a lot of libertarians should appreciate.
Okay, well, we can keep going, but you did say you had about an hour, so.
I appreciate that. It's great to be with you, Chris.
Yeah, yes, Mike. One thing I like about you is you have good answers, but you don't go too long. Some people have a good answer, but then they, kind of go too long. But your answers are just about right.
Well, I appreciate that. I know that I'm not always the charm candidate, right? So I don't presume that everyone wants to hear me prattle on for 15 minutes about every single thing that you might ask.
But you've got a good voice and you're a good speaker, and you like talking, so that's good. Well,
bless your heart. It's great to be with you, Chris. Good luck in 2026. I hope it's a great year for you.
Yeah, well, where can we find you out there, Mike? Still
At
still
MikeTermott.com.
Yes.
Always on Twitter. I know that you have Twitter followers. It's at Mike Termott with an
Yes.
underscore at the end, and you can find us there. And folks should feel free to reach out to me directly at mike@miketermott.com. We've got a lot going on. We're recruiting for the Republican Liberty Caucus, which I believe is an important element of the Republican Party. It's where a lot of libertarians live and hang out and build relationships with party officials and with elected officials, offer endorsements, and not just Rand Paul and Thomas Massey, but spread the word of libertarianism throughout the Republican Party and throughout their various states. We're launching a chapter of the Republican Liberty Caucus in Virginia, and folks can learn all about that. You can go to my website first, or you can go to rlc.org.
Obviously the Libertarian Party has somebody running for comptroller of Texas, but I think the election for comptroller of Texas could be big because there's a guy named Don Huffines, and then there's Christy Craddock. And Don Huffines has been endorsed by Ron Paul several times.
Don's a good guy.
Yeah, and I'm hoping Don Huffines beats Christy Craddock, but I think that will tell us a lot about where the red team is right now.
It may well. That's an interesting point. I think that Don will win that, and I think he will become the controller.
But unfortunately, Don got less than 12% when he ran against Greg Abbott in the primary 4 years ago. And the fact that Greg Abbott could get reelected governor after what he did, and many others, just that's appalling in my view. But anyway,
I think you and I will be pleased with the results that Don is able to achieve.
Well, let's hope so. Yeah. Well, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, go my novel Escape from the Village, go like the show. Check out my novel Escape from the Village. Check out my Substack. People are giving me money at buymeacoffee.com. Thank you, thank you, Mike Termott. I'm Chris Baker. We're out. Buy my novel Escape from the Village from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to the Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Support the forum. Go to buymeacoffee.com/fountainheadforum. Thank you.